1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our episode, From Ballots to Bodies, Abortion, Trans Rights, and the Battle for Bodily Autonomy. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Become a member today at lauraflanders.org.
We have hit a hinge moment in our political and personal lives. I say that as a woman, as a lesbian, and as a person who cares about freedom and bodily autonomy. For 50 years, the question of abortion has divided American people and policymakers. But in 2022, when the Supreme Court in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health overturned the constitutional right to abortion that was established by Roe versus Wade in 1973, it did away with federal standards, empowered states to set their own rules, and dramatically changed the political scene. Now, extremist Republicans are pushing to go further, to a total national ban, while other Republicans seem frankly freaked out that they have handed Democrats such a powerful motivating tool for their base. At the local level, 20-plus states currently ban or restrict abortion, while the procedure is broadly legal elsewhere. Multiple states, including Michigan, Ohio, and Kansas, have already organized to protect abortion rights at the state level, and come November, a record 10 more will decide whether to enshrine abortion rights in their state constitutions. If every abortion rights measure is successful this fall, 5 states with existing bans and restrictions could see abortion re-legalized. And since 2022, well, every ballot measure to protect abortion rights has passed, while every measure to restrict or weaken those rights has failed. When it comes to controlling bodies, abortion is not the only issue, mind you. Access to trans health, contraception, and freedom from sterilization abuse are all on the same controller's agenda. And brutal restrictions on all of those have been at least proposed, and a few have passed in the last few years. Elections can go either way. Clearly, voters could vote to control more bodies more this election, but we could also enshrine more freedoms more firmly in more places. So, with voting already or soon to be underway, we turn to 3 experts. In Florida, Nadine Smith directs Equality Florida, that state's largest organization dedicated to ending discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Heidi L. Sieck is the founder of VOTEPROCHOICE, which focuses on women of color candidates at the state level and BIPOC, young and new voters, as well as down-ballot races. And Renee Bracey Sherman, the so-called Beyoncé of abortion storytelling, is co-author of the just-released book, Liberating Abortion, claiming our history, sharing our stories, and building the reproductive future we deserve. Welcome, all of you. Let's start at the very top. Thank you for joining me. Do you agree that we are at a hinge moment? And would you agree kind of with my framing? Let's start with you, Renee.
Well, I'm actually going to disagree with your framing because, you started off by saying that abortion has divided America for the last 50 years. That's actually super not true. Like 80% of this country believes that abortion should be legal and should be available. What has been divided is our politics, and that has to do with gerrymandering of our political system, the way in which money, capitalism plays a role in who gets to take votes and deny election results, all of those things. And one of the things that we found in our book, Liberating Abortion, was that abortion has been around for thousands of years, but has been deeply embedded in this country's founding, and that until the mid-1800s, it was widely acceptable. That it wasn't until the Comstock Act, when we started to see bans on abortion, restrictions, that people even then laughed about it and didn't take it seriously. But this idea that abortion is stigmatized or a a fraught political topic is actually quite new and is something that has been thrust upon us
I
through
love it. All right, so
politics.
we're talking
But
between the
when you talk to
1880s and 1920s, that kind
yes,
of era.
yes,
Heidi, what about you?
yes.
What would you to pick apart from my introduction? And I'm totally in favor of it.
I 100% agree with Renee, and I'll go a little bit deeper and more experiential, which is it across the board for decades. Over 80% of this country did not want Roe v. Wade overturned. They don't think their elected officials should be making decisions about their pregnancies or their health care. And really, we have to understand that this was a political tactic. I started my career in 1989 in Planned Parenthood of Lincoln, Nebraska, and the Nebraska unicameral. And I saw firsthand that there was something happening in the country. And what was happening was that Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California, a pro-choice governor who actually signed into law expansion of abortion rights and birth control access in California, realized that he could not get elected without the evangelical anti-choice minority, which is about 18% of the country. So starting in the 80s, this overly funded anti-choice minority started investing in political infrastructure. And that included the Federalist Society, which was training judges. It included the American Legislative Exchange Commission that was looking at templated legislations in state legislatures, protest infrastructure. And the tactic of mobilizing this small majority of people was extremely well-funded and organized. And I will tell you, as a person that started in the States watching this strategy unfold, unfortunately, what happened is our progressive democratic ecosystem did not answer that tactic at all for decades. So we are in a country with overturned when we should never have been.
All right, so it's new, relatively new. It's manufactured, not genuine. Doesn't mean it doesn't have real impacts. This particular moment. And Nadine, I'm coming to you. Imara Jones has talked about the anti-trans hate campaign and that machine that has been fueling up something like 530 initiatives in states, ballots introduced in states around the country in the last few years. They haven't passed. Most of them haven't gone in most places. But you're in the front line in Florida, and life has changed a lot for people there. Can you talk about the hinge as you see it, where you are?
Well, absolutely. People talk about Project 2025, and they talk about the restriction on freedoms and this all-out assault on reproductive health, abortion, healthcare of all kinds. And all of that is unfolding in Florida. It's not theoretical here. And I think the lesson that has just been laid out is such an important one. How they manufacture outrage and then use the outrage as an organizing mechanism. I think back to another Floridian, not Ron DeSantis, but Anita Bryant. And when Anita Bryant was launching her so-called Save Our Children's campaign, which started in Florida and marched across the country, and it left in its wake laws that it took decades to undo, bans on marriage, bans on adoption. She was bankrolled by the moral majority, and their big issue was not abortion. It was the integration of schools. Mm-hmm. And so they use these same techniques. It will be whatever it needs to be. It will be the Tea Party. It will be anti-immigrant. It will be whatever can inflame and mobilize. And what we're seeing now is the convergence of all of those tactics and strategies. And for LGBTQ organizers, there has to be an understanding that these are causes in common. There has to be an understanding that when they say you do not have control of your own body, of your own sexuality, of the most intimate aspect of who you are, they're taking away the freedom on which every other freedom rests.
And as you've pointed out, Renee, in your book, there was also this campaign against sex education and this kind of trope of the vulnerable child, usually a white child, mixed into all of this. To what extent do you think we've grasped it now, that this is a continuum, one big package? Or are we still siloing sex ed from reproductive rights, from trans rights, from health, family, you name it?
I mean, I think we're finally getting there, that we're organizing together, right? And this is what our communities have always experienced, because as Audre Lorde says, we don't live single issue lives. But the way that nonprofits or organizers are often funded is to work on single issues. And so we've done a lot of effort to join our movements together. Just last month, we had the Gender Liberation March in DC. I was at it, and it was this beautiful march for trans justice and liberation, abortion justice, racial justice, all of these things together, understanding that they're all connected. And we had a tent for banned books, because as they're banning sex ed, as they're banning trans youth healthcare, trans healthcare at all, and abortion, they're also banning books. They're banning access to information. They're limiting access to higher education. It's the same people. We do not have different opposition. It's the exact same people. They're just fighting about a different thing on a different day. And so when we come together, we'll be able to stand against them.
Nebraska is a very interesting case in point in terms of being at a hinge moment. You want to talk about what's happening there right now, Heidi?
Well, as we indicated, I started in Nebraska. I came up through Nebraska, and it's a very unique state. It's very libertarian. And right now they've got two competing ballot initiatives, and they've got a very interesting Senate race that's an independent running for Senate, and really having these conversations about body autonomy and freedom. But I will say, we have to remember that this is an infrastructure investment issue. It is a political tactic for power. And so for decades, the money on the anti-choice side has been going to investments in these local infrastructure. And we saw it in Nebraska. It was a real church issue. There was a lot of mobilizing and political action coming out of churches. And then these C3, C4, these are 501c3, 501c4, and political infrastructure was fully funded that didn't have to constantly be reinventing and scraping for resources. It was a fully funded local infrastructure. And I will say, we don't operate like that on the progressive and political Democratic side. Most of our investments are going into the federal infrastructure. And that is the problem. And it's been happening for many decades. So we see that in Nebraska, where it's suddenly been overtaken. We used to have Democratic senators. We had a Democratic governor. My family were Democrats, operating throughout the Nebraska Democratic Party and the political scene. And suddenly it's totally overtaken by very conservative statewide electeds. This is an investment in infrastructure. And we can go on. I can go on and on about that tactic. We can talk about 2010 and the lack of state legislator infrastructure. But I continually want to remind us, it's issues, yes, and they disconnect. They try to disconnect the issues, but it's all the voting rights, and the taking away of voting rights is also the same infrastructure as the anti-choice minority. So we have to be thinking about that investment tactics.
Where do you stand in Florida with respect to sort of infrastructure investment, Nadine? I ask because it's not like people haven't been aware of what's been going on under Governor Ron DeSantis, and Florida has been a focal point. But in this election, it's kind of written off at the national presidential level. Not that I think it should be.
Well, I think Heidi's right. You have to have proximity to the issue. You have to organize at the state level, and it's not sufficient simply to focus on presidential elections. When you look at who's making the biggest decisions about our lives that affect us on a daily basis, it's happening in state legislatures. It's happening in city councils and county commissions. And so my message as I travel around the country is Florida is the front line of a national fight, and you're all in it. The only question is, do you realize it? And if you do realize it, what will you do? And so whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating, we understand from the very beginning, Equality Florida has been an organization willing to fight for abortion access. We see it as, again, causes in common, intrinsically linked. And I think one of the other things that's important in this moment is to understand the worldviews that are in competition right now. When you listen to J.D. Vance, not just on the campaign trail, but on the podcasts he made when no one was paying that much attention to him, they reveal everything that they think. They think women should not have the right to vote. They believe that it's not make America great. It's take America back to the place in which women are property, children are property, and white men of means decide everything. And they're really pretty unabashed about it. So the book banning is part of it, but the curriculum banning in Florida, they are whitewashing history. The same people that went in to remove books that include any representation of LGBT people, or I think the first book they banned was And Tango Makes Three, the true story of two gay penguins who adopted an abandoned penguin chick. But the same people who launched that very quickly went after The Life and Times of Rosa Parks, went after, just Florida leads the nation in banned books right now, but it runs even deeper. It's the ban on sex ed. They do not want social emotional learning. They want guns in school. They want to lower the standards and put, former police officers and military in schools without the right certification. And they also want to get rid of teaching around domestic violence and even consent. And this is what happens when this incel mentality becomes the driving force of a major political party.
And when you have a country that is so widely gerrymandered as we have right now, we're going to come back to what you, especially in Florida, have been doing, Nadine, because there are great lessons to be learned from your leadership and your organization and what you've built there. But I do want to clear up a few things that may be confusing people in terms of where the parties stand. Very quickly on Vance and Trump, you alluded, Nadine, to the fact that they're not necessarily, especially the vice president candidate, is not necessarily saying out loud in public what he used to say. And he and Donald Trump seem to be fudging a little bit around the question of a federal ban, as if to suggest, well, if there are exceptions, it's somehow not a ban. Who wants to jump in on the truth versus lies on this kind of exceptions isn't a ban story? Renee?
I'd be happy to. The thing is, exceptions don't work. We know this, right?
I'm talking about exceptions for rape and incest.
For abortion, rape, incest, health indications, they don't work. I have worked with a number of abortion storytellers who experienced a sexual assault and should have been able to get an abortion and were not. We saw the stories in ProPublica of Amber Thurman and Candy Miller, who died in 2022 in Georgia. They should have been able to get abortions, but they were so scared of the criminalization. In Amber's case, her providers were so scared to give her the procedure that she needed, to give her a DNC, and they waited and she died because they were afraid of the criminalization. The way in which people aren't able to get the care that they need, these exceptions are not workable. They are put forward as a common sense solution, but in reality, healthcare doesn't work like that. It takes minutes or seconds to be able to save someone's life. And if you have to check to see what the law allows, that is when people are dying. But also, if you truly believe that someone who is on the record as constantly lying as former president is saying, oh, I'm not going to do a national ban, but the people who are funding him want a national ban, who do you think he's going to listen to? Because I promise you, when he said that he thought that the Florida ballot initiative was going too far and he wasn't going to support it, and then they called him up and he said, just kidding, I'm flipping it. That wasn't even 24 hours. So you can't take him at his word. It is worth the paper that Trump University degrees are written on. But also remember, he gets his money and his campaign from the anti-abortion movement, and they will be collecting in on what they paid for, which is a national ban and national criminalization of abortion.
There have been some Heidi, go ahead.
No, and I'll add to that, and I'll sound like a broken record, but you got to look at everything through the lens of power and politics and strategy and tactics. The message is shifting because they're seeing their polling numbers that women are just not having this. They don't like it. They're having personal experiences, like privileged women in red states who would normally be writing checks to Donald Trump's campaign are having impact and not getting the access that they are used to. So again, remember, like, to get elected, we have to mobilize this. They have to mobilize this anti-choice minority. And now the anti-choice minority is falling apart. They're going for the anti-trans minority, but now they also have to do something with women. So they're shifting their messaging strategy. Melania Trump suddenly coming out with a biography that says she supports abortion. You know, like, Donald Trump is also pretty pro-choice, I would imagine. You know, but he is about power and control. And so, to what Nadine was saying, this is all about that. Whatever it takes to control and to gain power, purging voters, you know, removing voters off of voter rolls in all of the red states, in Texas and Florida and Georgia and Ohio. Like, this is all a tactic, and they will say whatever it takes to win their elections based on whatever they're seeing in the polls.
Yeah, and there's what they say, and then there's what they do. And I think this question of control and authoritarian tendencies this question is very clear.
Yes.
The conversation continues, but first, some news for you from Laura Flanders and friends.
Hi, lovely listeners. I'm Laura, and I want to personally share with you some of the episodes we've been percolating here for the next few weeks at Laura Flanders and Friends. Right after the election, we will have some of our favorite movement leaders convened for a roundtable discussion. Straddling the election week of November 5th, we'll be talking about the possibilities of another post-election insurrection with the people behind a very sobering film called War Game. And in the next few weeks, we have our latest episode from the Meet the BIPOC press feature, which this time looks at a new series from Imara Jones and the Anti-Trans Hate Machine, as well as a new movement media alliance that's just been formed. All that is coming up in addition to next week's episode, where we present organizers from the front lines of the effort to defend bodily autonomy. Laura Flanders and Friends is, as we say, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a backseat to the people who are doing it. Our guests are doing it. Now we just want to thank you, our member supporters, for doing your part. All of you who have yet to become members, please do it. Join our community today by making a one-time donation or make it monthly at lauraflanders.org/donate. That's lauraflanders.org/donate. Thank you.
Now back to our full uncut conversation from our episode From Ballots to Bodies, Abortion, Trans Rights, and the Battle for Bodily Autonomy.
I come to you, Nadine, for what life is already like in Florida. I understand that there are police being called out on activists on this issue.
I mean, the governor in Florida has been so extreme. He has sent investigators to people's homes for signing the petition that got the constitutional amendment on the ballot that would restore access to abortion in Florida. The willingness to use state funds to run political campaign ads against abortion, against adult use of marijuana, all of these things are so far beyond the pale. But because Florida has been a Republican majority and now a Republican supermajority for nearly 30 years, there's no checks and balances. I mean, Florida is a cautionary tale for what can happen in this country without those checks and balances. And he's gone further. He's threatening television stations that run ads against, that are in support of the abortion ballot measure. So this is somebody who's removed duly elected public officials without the authority to do so, lost in court. But the outcome is he didn't have the right to remove you, but I don't have the power to reinstate you. And the mechanism to reinstate you is controlled by him. So this kind of authoritarianism is already afoot. And so I think it's really important that we understand we don't just have to do a character assessment. Trump, yes, he's a liar. Vance reinvents himself every time a new check is written. And we know this, but we can look at actions and we can say to ourselves, who placed the Supreme Court justices on the bench that ended Roe v. Wade? Without a doubt, that was Donald Trump. So whatever, last minute smoke and mirrors they try to throw our way because they see women across the political spectrum abandoning them around this issue, don't fall for it. Don't go by what they say. Look at what they do, look at what they've done. And their goal is to enforce an abortion ban nationwide, period.
What is the status of Amendment 4 there in Florida?
Well, the status of Amendment 4 is that the majority of Floridians want access to abortion, that it enjoys wide support. And we're a state that requires not just 50%, but 60% plus one in order to pass measures. In fact, Floridians have been pretty good at passing good measures, whether it's, restoring voting rights, solar energy, even when they have competing. One of the things the Republican legislature likes to do is to muddy the waters, and yet Floridians tend to find their way through. And now, though, we're in unprecedented territory where the governor is using our own taxpayer dollars to run his own political campaign. Is it legal? No. Does it matter to him? No. He has weaponized state agencies again and again and again. It is the hallmark of his campaign to take state agencies and make them weapons of his own political ambition.
Now, you have won some victories, and I want to make sure we let our audience know about those. And one of those was in the fight against another one of DeSantis's signature initiatives, which was the Don't Say Gay bill, trans bill. Talk about what was done in response to that, what you organized and what you won and how.
Well, I do think it's important for people, especially folks who don't live in Florida, to understand, even though we are the front line, even though we have been, face to face with this onslaught, these manufactured outrages that are all part of a political strategy to invigorate the extremist base, they're not winning. The tide truly is turning. In fact, in the last election, an endorsement by Moms for Liberty, which again is not a grassroots organization of concerned parents, it's a political operation funded by the same folks who are the architects of all of this. They're losing. I mean, there are candidates who preemptively said, please, DeSantis, Moms for Liberty, don't endorse me. But even their proximity wasn't enough to save it. Even trying to obscure their proximity to DeSantis wasn't enough to save them. So when people are going to the polls, there's a clear repudiation of what DeSantis has unleashed on our state. And, so there are places where Moms for Liberty has said, we're not even going to show up anymore because we're outnumbered 10-1 by parents who actually have kids in the system, who are tired of seeing books banned, who are tired of seeing LGBTQ kids targeted and harassed, or are tired of watching our best teachers flee the state. We're in the midst of a desperate teacher shortage. And now when you look at universities where they have done the same thing, replaced competent people with their political stooges, we're seeing our university systems begin to drop in the rankings. And I think I just saw there was an article, something like of the 350 tenured professors, top professors in our state, more than half have their resumes out to go elsewhere. And so I say all that to say that when you stand up authentically as the people being impacted, not these fabricated, phony political operations, cosplaying as grassroots organizers, we're actually clawing back much of what has been taken. Again, the majority, poll after poll shows the majority of Floridians want access to abortion. And when it comes to the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans bill, one of the most important things was we did not allow them to attach a name to it that was intended only as a scare tactic and a lie. We made people look at what it actually did. And we took them to court. And in the settlement, not only did we get almost everything that we asked for, we got more, because they count on shadows. They count on intimidation. They count on vagueness to cause people to curtail freedoms on their behalf while they can have some plausible deniability. And the more we force them to say out loud what they are up to, the more people are willing to repudiate their entire agenda.
And Renee, you mentioned Georgia, where those 2 women died. That 6-week ban was lifted.
Yes, I actually just got back from Georgia as part of the book tour. And yes, while that is a celebration, in talking with the abortion providers down there, it's always a holding your breath, because the state will always go and challenge it. And it's really difficult to get the word out, because one day they have access to abortion, one day they don't, and they don't want to like schedule appointments for patients, and then another injunction comes in a couple days later and have to re-cancel those appointments, traumatize those patients again, get their hopes up, and then actually say we can't provide abortion. So what is really important for people to understand, that even if the court will say, oh, we're holding it, it only might be for a little bit of time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that immediately access to abortions later into pregnancy will be available, because the confusion and the laws. And at the end of the day, this is not how we should be providing healthcare. This is not what people who need abortions deserve. They should not have to be figuring out what the court's doing or constantly calling in and unsure. Providers should be able to provide abortions, do their job every single day. People who need abortions should be able to go to the clinics, get the care that they need, and not question whether or not what they're doing is a crime.
Now, in New York, where I'm sitting, abortion is legal, not always easily accessible, but it is legal, and it will probably, a ballot measure, be enshrined into the Constitution this November. There are other states that could also settle this matter. Heidi, is it possible that we could actually emerge with fewer states in less chaos after November, or maybe we need to go a few more weeks, than we are in now?
Well, I certainly hope so. So the good news is that now that Roe has been overturned, everyone really understands what's at stake. And so we're seeing these ballot initiatives across the country winning by large numbers. And they have been, and they will continue to do so. I'm sure of it. However, it doesn't erase the trauma and the terrible stories, like the ones we know that we talked about here, but there are so many that we don't. And that is what is so heartbreaking to me, because we will eventually probably get there. Like, folks understand they all need to be showing up, the ballot initiatives, etc. We've got this presidential that obviously abortion is number one in everyone's mind. I just know that it's going to take us a little while to get the infrastructure in place. And it's going to have to happen at the state level. It's going to have to happen at the local level. We're going to have to be working in every area possible by making sure policies are in place as fast as possible and investments are being made to provide care in the red states as much as possible.
And let's not forget that there are people right now being denied health care, trans people, entire generation that is facing not being able to get the life-saving care that could keep them this side of depression, keeps them this side of suicide even. The clock is ticking.
Yes. And I will say, thank goodness for the internet. Thank goodness for medication abortion. It's different now than it was before Roe was in place. At least we can communicate with each other and help, like get people connected, but it should not be this difficult. It's unconscionable to me. And I think that processing the trauma of all that people are being denied is going to just take us a while. We're going to get where we need to get, but it's going to take a decade before we have all of the pieces in place, assuming that we win these elections.
We are running out of time, but I want to come to a close. We talked about the top of the ticket on the Republican side, coming to the top of the ticket on the Democratic side. Renee, you've got Harris Waltz talking about restoring Roe. Every time we've done a show, especially around Black women's health, Black women's reproductive justice, people have said we need to do better than Roe. We have our sights on much more than going back 50 years. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Roe was... It was a law that allowed some people to have abortions, but it created a pathway in which if you did not follow a very specific type of abortion in a certain place, then you were subject to criminalization. And also a lot of the restrictions that we've seen over the last decade were allowed under Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. What we need is reproductive justice. We need the government out of people's decision-making. We need abortion to be decriminalized. And, as we say in our book, we need abortion to be liberated.
Liberate abortion. We're going to come to our closing comment. And Nadine, I just want to thank you. I know you are facing a hurricane evacuation order as we speak, so we want to get you to safety. But we have a closing comment, a closing question I ask everybody. And I want to ask you, what do you think will be the story that the future tells of this moment?
Well, backlash is a lagging indicator. It is what happens when you make progress, and the people, by the time those who oppose that progress marshal their forces, you've already reached a tipping point. It doesn't mean it's not painful. It doesn't mean that they can't inflict a great deal of harm. But the reality is that on the other side of this, because of the organizing that we're doing right now, because of the grassroots mobilization, because we're having the kinds of conversations with people across the political spectrum who are realizing, hey, this isn't just rhetoric. They're taking something so fundamental away from me. Men that I went to, high school friends who I don't think of as particularly progressive. They're like, I don't want a world in which my 14-year-old son is suddenly confined to a life by decisions made by politicians, not him, not his girlfriend. And I think that resonates with people. I don't want to have to make decisions about my child first by checking in with the governor, then by checking in with the state legislature. And so I think we have to position ourselves not just to defeat this immediate attack, but really to set our feet and our focus on the future that is equitable. Like we can't simply be against what they're doing. We have to, we have to actually have a vision for the kind of world that people want to grow up in, that is so irresistible that even folks right now who haven't quite gotten to where we are see themselves in that and are enthusiastic about it. And so I think what the Harris Walls team has tapped into when they talk about joy is, I think America is having a hate hangover right now. I think there's a deep desire for some kind of reconciliation, some kind of family reunion where we can sort of build on something other than division. And the question of these sort of competing narratives is what's playing out right now. It's why you hear Trump and Vance get so extreme with their rhetoric, with their over-the-top things that he wouldn't have even said some of these things in 2016. But the question of whether or not that spirit of reconciliation arrives in time for the election, that's the work that lays in front of us right now.
Will we recover from the hate hangover? What do you think, Heidi?
Yes, I do think we will. And listen, I come to you as a mentee and longtime friend of Kamala Harris. I worked on her first campaign for district attorney in 2003, and we worked on many projects together. This is a woman who taught me what the policy frame of reproductive justice is, and she lives it, and she lived it then, and she lives it now. She's talking about the connection between all the values base of freedom and control. She's talking about the economic justice aspects of body autonomy. She wants more than just Roe v. Wade enshrined. In fact, she told me directly to my face a few months ago, she's like, you stay here in San Francisco, you help this mayor get elected, you help support the San Francisco Reproductive Freedom Act, because that is what she taught us to do. So I am going to say the way that we're going to get through this is investment in local and state leadership, investment in local and state policy, investment in our communities, connection to our civic participation in where we live. So I'm hopeful that this federal campaign, the Harris Walls campaign, will ignite us all into our communities again, but we can't let that stop. We have everything that we need. People want body autonomy. They want reproductive freedom. We have to give folks the opportunity to put those policies in place. The possibility is there.
What do you think, Renee? And thank you for your t-shirt. Will we tell the stories that liberate us?
Yes, I think that all of us who have abortions should share our stories. And I look forward to seeing a full plan that includes making sure people not only have access to abortion, but the ability to have children and live free from state-sanctioned violence, because we cannot have reproductive justice so long as we have criminalization of abortion and policing in Black and Brown communities in this country.
Renee, Heidi, Nadine, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. I really appreciate your work, and I look forward to seeing you and talking with you on the other side of all of this. May there be one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this full uncut conversation from our weekly episode, Cut for Time for Broadcast. To dive deeper into the conversation, check out the episode notes posted at patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or make it monthly. Go to lauraflanders.org/donate. Thanks again to all our members, and thanks for listening.